All right. Today I want to talk a little bit about revision. You'll recall that I talked about the shapes. We can use shapes to talk about stories. And I talked about the line, which really was about sequencing and ascending action in denouement. And talked about squares, which was representing sort of using blocks of information. And I talked about the circle, which in some ways represents the unity of a story. That a story introduces a problem of some kind, and everything in the story moves to its resolution of that problem. In revision, what I'd like to suggest is you can use these shapes, but I'm going to kind of change it a little bit. I'd like us first to look at the idea of unity in the story, then to look at blocks of information, and finally to look at the line. What people do far too often, and I do it myself, in revision is that I concentrate on minutia. I concentrate on the sentence level issues. I concentrate on word choice. I concentrate on the rhythm of the sentences. And while that's important to do, if you're going to change major elements of your scene, or you're going to render something in summary instead of scene, then all of this is going to be immaterial and we're going to waste a lot of time. So this is just a picture I'd like us to look at here, and then I'm going to take us over to some pages and see how this applies on the page itself. Okay, here we have very short part of Frank McCourt's Angela's Ashes, and we had this as a reading. And I'm just using it as an example. It doesn't matter what's really said on the page. This should apply to anything. And I only have 2 pages here, but it doesn't really matter that it applies to 2 pages. It can apply to 100 pages. It can apply to chapters, and it can apply to entire books. So what I want to do first is I want to take a look at the beginning of my story, right in here. Somewhere in here, I want to be very clear about what the conflict is. What is the dynamic action? How is it represented? Dynamic action, if we think about conflict, will be represented by 2 things. I might see it in the first sentence, 1 and 2, or I might see it in the first paragraph, 1 and 2, but I'm going to see it someplace very soon because we need to have that dynamic action to make the reading interesting for our reader. So we need to get that started. Then I want to think about, because I'm thinking about the circle here, I want to see this problem, I want to see this dynamic action resolved in the ending. I want to see that sense of unity. The next thing to look at is now the information on the page. What am I doing with summary? Here's a summary here, for example. Here might be a scene that lasts to here. Here's another section of summary. When we think about our text on the page, we want to consider that time on the page is also our attention. If something gets a lot of attention, it should be more significant than something that gets less attention. So if this is a long scene here, which it is, we might consider this to be really the heart of the story. This is where something very significant is happening. This small section here of summary might be less important. If we're spending a lot of time on some section that doesn't have a great deal of importance, we might think about that in terms of the rhythm of the piece. We want to shorten it and make it briefer. And if something that's highly significant, we want to expand and really deal with it in depth. And the last is, of course, just looking at the sentence level. And that's us going through and considering the rhythms of our sentences, how they're moving, this, in its relationship to the next sentence. People will talk about we all learned in early grades that we should vary our sentence patterns, and that's true because we do not want to develop a monotony in our sentences. But the sentences are the last thing to look at. First thing to look at is unity. Then we want to look at these chunks of information. How much time are you spending on a certain scene? What are you accomplishing out of that time? How much time are you spending on something else? What do you accomplish? Is there a relationship between time on the page and what you accomplish in terms of its importance? And then lastly, the line.